The Pacific covers more than a third of the planet. From above it looks continuous, calm, and blue. From inside it, scale becomes difficult to hold in the mind. Horizons curve without interruption. There are no landmarks, no borders, and no reliable sense of proximity. In the eastern Pacific, off Central America, long-established patterns dominate: trade winds, warm surface water, and broad currents that move steadily west. Most days are quiet. Swells rise and fall in regular motion. Night arrives without sound. The ocean does not rush events. It allows time to pass without intervention. José Salvador Alvarenga was born in El Salvador, and later accounts place his birth around 1975. He grew up in a coastal environment where fishing was common work rather than a specialized profession. Skills were learned through repetition: small boats, handlines, weather changes near shore, the practical handling of fish. Over time, Alvarenga migrated north to Mexico, like many others seeking steadier income than was available at home. By the early 2010s he was working along the Pacific coast of southern Mexico, in fishing communities where short trips were routine and the expectation of return shaped every decision. The boat used in this kind of coastal work was typically a small open fiberglass skiff, often referred to as a ponga. It was not designed for long travel. It carried an outboard motor, basic fishing gear, and minimal supplies. There was no cabin. Shelter was improvised from clothing, plastic, or whatever could be repurposed on board. Emergency equipment varied from boat to boat, but in this setting the underlying assumption was consistent: the trip would be brief, close enough to land to return the same day, or within a day or two at most. That assumption is not reckless on most days. It becomes fragile when a chain of small failures begins. On November 17, 2012, Alvarenga departed from the coast of Mexico on a fishing trip in a small open boat with a second man, Ezequiel Cordoba. Reporting and later interviews described Cordoba as younger and less experienced. The trip was not planned as an extended voyage. Weather conditions shifted. A storm developed. Wind and waves increased, and visibility dropped. During the storm, the boat's communications became unusable, and at some point the outboard motor failed and could not be restarted. The precise mechanical cause is not conclusively documented in a single agreed account, but the outcome is clear: without propulsion, the boat became subject to wind and current alone. When conditions calmed, land was no longer visible. The coastline had fallen away beyond the horizon. Once the storm passed, the immediate risk of capsizing eased, and the longer survival problem became unavoidable. Fresh water was limited to what had been brought for a short trip. There was no desalination system, and seawater could not be used without worsening dehydration. Rain became the main source of drinking water. It was collected whenever it arrived, using containers and any surface that could funnel water into storage. When rain was frequent, it offered a partial reset: drinking water, occasional rinsing of salt from skin, a moment of physical relief. When rain stopped, the problem tightened. Dry spells forced rationing and inactivity. Movement was reduced to conserve moisture. The body's decline during dehydration is not sudden at first. It builds quietly: dry mouth, fatigue, slower healing, increasing irritation from salt and sun. In an open boat, there is no way to escape exposure. Shade is rarely reliable. Even when cloud cover arrives, humidity and salt remain. Survival becomes a schedule built around weather that cannot be predicted or controlled. Food came from the surrounding ocean. The boat still carried fishing lines, hooks, and cutting tools. Fish could be caught when conditions allowed. Without fuel or a functional engine, there was no cooking. The fish were eaten raw. In later accounts, Alvarenga described consuming not only flesh but also fluids, which can provide limited hydration and minerals. Larger catches were not guaranteed. Some days produced fish. Some days produced none. At times, sea turtles surfaced near the boat and could be captured by hand, providing a larger amount of meat that could be consumed over days. Sharks also appeared, and while they could offer significant calories, they were dangerous to handle in a cramped, unstable setting. Cuts and punctures were common risks. In saltwater, wounds heal slowly. Infection is always possible. The boat offered no clean environment for recovery, only repetition: catch, cut, eat, endure the sun, and wait for rain. As weeks turned into months, the most defining condition was the absence of interruption. There were no landmarks to measure movement. The horizon remained the same circle each day, broken only by cloud formations. Even the drift itself was not perceptible in short intervals. Currents carried the boat westward steadily, but the change in position could not be confirmed without instruments. In this kind of isolation, routine becomes a survival tool. Tasks are repeated to impose structure: setting lines, scanning the water, collecting rain, preserving energy, and maintaining the boat as best as possible. Exposure never stops. Sun burns skin during the day. Nights can be colder than expected on open water, especially with wet clothing and wind. Salt accumulates in fabric and on skin, causing sores where clothing rubs. Eyes suffer from glare. Lips crack. The body loses weight gradually as calories remain inconsistent. Meanwhile, equipment deteriorates. Knives dull. Containers crack. Plastic becomes brittle. Clothing breaks down. The boat's surfaces were under constant wetting and drying, and the storage space remains limited. Adaptation is mostly about repurposing, using a cooler as a container, using scraps of material as shade, using whatever is still intact to continue the same basic system. Over time, the difference between two people living under the same conditions can become pronounced. Accounts indicate that Ezequiel Cordoba's health deteriorated earlier and more severely. He ate less and participated less in daily tasks. The exact medical pathway is not documented with clinical precision. There was no examination, no measurements, no independent observation at sea, so the causes are described in broad terms: malnutrition, dehydration, exhaustion, infection risk, and psychological strain. One element that appears in reporting is that Cordoba eventually refused to eat raw food. In a setting where the only available nutrition is uncooked fish and turtle, refusal quickly becomes decisive. Whether this refusal was driven by nausea, distress, illness, or fear of raw consumption, the result would be the same: rapid loss of strength and increased vulnerability. As Cordoba weakened, the burden of labor shifted almost entirely to Alvarenga. The environment does not adjust to human capacity. Lines still must be set to eat. Water still must be collected when it comes. Waste still must be managed. In an open boat, even simple maintenance tasks matter: keeping items from washing away, keeping the boat as stable as possible, bailing when needed, protecting the limited tools that remain. If one person stops participating, the other loses redundancy. Injuries become more serious because there is no backup labor and no assistance. Cordoba died during the drift. The exact date is uncertain in public accounts, and estimates vary because time at sea becomes difficult to track and later reconstructions depend largely on Alvarenga's testimony. The cause is generally attributed to starvation and dehydration, with the broader background of prolonged exposure and decline. After Cordoba's death, Alvarenga committed the body to the sea. This act is described in reporting as a functional decision consistent with maritime practice under extreme conditions, necessary for sanitation and also for the basic ability to continue living in a small space. After that, the journey continued with one person and no companionship. Solitary survival changes the internal environment even if the external environment remains the same. There is no shared schedule and no conversation. There is no second observer to confirm reality or to absorb time. Fatigue becomes harder to manage without external structure. Fear can become quiet and constant rather than acute. Days blend into one another. The ocean's indifference becomes more apparent. It does not reward effort. It does not punish mistakes with immediate drama. It wears a person down through duration. Survival becomes the ability to keep repeating the same tasks without proof that they will matter. In late January 2014, after roughly 14 months adrift, commonly reported as about 438 days, the boat reached the Marshall Islands. The transition from open ocean to land does not necessarily arrive as a dramatic revelation. Low vegetation can appear as a dark shape on the horizon, too small at first to be trusted. In this case, the boat grounded near Ebon Atoll. Alvarenga reached shore and encountered local residents, who provided water and food. He was transported for medical evaluation. Accounts describe him as malnourished but stable, with no immediately life-threatening injuries at the time of discovery. Afterward, attention shifted from immediate survival to verification. The distance from Mexico to the Marshall Islands is vast, and skepticism was predictable. However, drift analysis based on known current patterns supported the plausibility of westward movement over that time span. Details of fishing methods and conditions were compared against what is possible in that region and on that kind of boat. Not every element can be independently proven, months at sea leave gaps that no one can document, but the broader narrative aligns with what ocean systems can do to an unpowered vessel over long time periods. Alvarenga's drift is one of the longest documented survival ordeals at sea. It is not defined by a single heroic moment. It is defined by repetition and narrow margins. The Pacific did not behave as an enemy with intent. It behaved as a system: wind, current, weather, time. The story's significance is partly practical, what the human body can endure with minimal tools, but also historical. It shows how quickly a small coastal boat can become unfindable, and how survival at sea can depend less on drama than on persistence. When the drift ended, it ended quietly, because land intervened. The ocean continued unchanged. The record remained. The silence after is part of what the story leaves behind.